This is Heliox, where evidence meets empathy. Independent, moderated, timely, deep, gentle, clinical, global, and community conversations about things that matter. Breathe easy, we go deep and lightly surface the big ideas. Ooh, that's a good one.
It is. It's a really interesting concept.
Yeah.
So basically, it's kind of like, are we pushing the planet too far?
Mm-hmm.
You know, is Earth going to be able to handle everything that humanity is throwing at it?
Right. Yeah. Like if the planet was a bank account, is it going to go bankrupt?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to help us unpack this, we're going to be looking at this 2025 report from the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries at Exeter University.
Wow.
Yeah. It's called Climate Crisis Risk Assessment, Planetary Solvency, Finding Our Balance with Nature.
I like it.
I know, it's a really
catchy
title.
Yeah.
So what's really fascinating about this report is that it kind of takes this financial risk assessment approach, but applies it to like the whole Earth system.
Yeah, it's like they're looking at it as, we talk about climate change, nature, lost resource depletion, all the usual suspects. But they're looking at it from this perspective of like, how is this impacting the planet's ability to actually support us?
Right.
Like to provide for us.
So it's not just about the environmental damage. It's about whether we're actually putting our own future at risk.
Exactly. Yeah. And they really emphasize how much we rely on what they call ecosystem services.
Okay.
And these are basically the benefits that we get from having a healthy planet. Things like clean air and water, fertile soil, a stable climate, like all the things that make life possible.
Yeah.
And we often take them for granted, right?
Totally. We just assume they'll always be there.
Exactly.
But, it's like we're living off the interest from this giant savings account.
Yeah.
I
like that.
But we're not paying attention to the balance.
Yeah. And this report is like, whoa, hold on a second.
Yeah.
You're actually drawing down that balance way faster than it can replenish itself.
Oh, no.
Yeah, they're talking about how we're pushing past what are called planetary boundaries. Mm-hmm. These are like the safe operating limits for things like climate change, biodiversity loss, resource use. It's like if you have a bathtub, right, and the water's slowly filling up.
Okay.
As long as the inflow is less than the outflow, you're good.
You're fine, yeah.
But if we keep increasing that inflow, eventually it's going to overflow.
Oh, that makes perfect sense.
And the report is basically saying we're getting dangerously close to overflowing the tub.
Oh, no. Okay, so we're in a bit of a mess then.
Yeah.
But this report doesn't just, point out all the problems, does it?
No, it doesn't, actually. They talk about solutions and this concept of planetary solvency.
Okay, what is that?
So planetary solvency is about actively managing our impact on the planet, right?
Okay.
To make sure that it can remain this stable and supportive foundation for humanity. It's not just about reacting to each crisis as it pops up, but actually thinking long-term and being proactive.
Okay, so it's not just about putting out fires. It's about, preventing the fires in the first place.
Exactly, and making sure the whole system is healthy. Yeah.
And they make this interesting comparison to managing a pension fund.
Okay.
You have to make sure there are enough resources to meet those future obligations.
Yeah, not just what we need right now, but what people are going to need decades from now.
Exactly, and that's where the report gets really interesting. They're saying our current approach to risk assessment is not cutting it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we tend to be way too short-sighted, too optimistic, ignoring those worst-case scenarios, those tipping points.
Right.
That could trigger, irreversible changes.
So we're kind of playing roulette with the planet's future then?
It's a little bit like that, yeah.
Okay.
Hoping for the best, but not really preparing for the worst.
It's not a good plan.
Not a good plan. And it's they use this analogy of assessing the Titanic's risk by only considering a little glancing blow at the iceberg.
Oh, no.
But ignoring the fact that it could actually sink.
Oh, that's, not a good comparison.
Not a good comparison. So to get around this, they introduce what they call the resilience principles.
Yes.
Which are these guidelines for realistic risk assessment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so tell me more about these resilience principles. How do they differ from the way we're currently assessing risk?
So one of the big ones that they highlight is this idea of Earth system primacy.
Earth system primacy?
Yeah, and it's a really interesting way to look at things because it kind of flips the script on how we typically think about the economy and the environment.
Right.
Instead of prioritizing those short-term economic gains at the expense of the planet, it's saying we need to recognize that a healthy economy actually depends on a healthy planet.
So it's not about sacrificing economic growth for the environment. It's recognizing that they're both, like, interconnected.
Exactly. Yeah, they're totally intertwined.
If the environment collapses, the economy collapses.
Exactly. You can't have one without the other.
Okay, that makes sense.
And another really crucial principle is systemic risk assessment, which emphasizes that we need to look at the interconnectedness of these risks instead of treating them in isolation. So they have this great case study in the report about water risk and how droughts, floods, and pollution are all connected.
Yeah.
And they can impact food security, energy production, human health, like it's all linked.
Wow. Okay, so it's like instead of just like putting out one fire at a time, we need to look at the whole forest and see how all the fires are connected.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay, that's a really good way to think about it.
Yeah, and they also talk about this idea of imaginative scenarios.
Imaginative scenario.
Yeah, this might sound a little bit out there.
Okay.
But it's about considering those worst-case scenarios.
Okay.
Even if they seem unlikely, just so that we can be prepared for the unexpected.
So don't just assume we can, like, swerve around the iceberg at the last minute.
Exactly.
Okay.
These systems have inertia. Once things start going wrong, it can be really hard to stop that cascade.
Right, yeah.
And then finally, there's latest science.
Okay.
Which, might seem kind of obvious. But it's about making sure that we're constantly updating our risk assessments based on the most up-to-date scientific findings.
Right, because the science is always evolving.
Exactly.
Especially with climate change, it seems like every new report is painting a more and a more concerning picture.
Absolutely. And this report is no exception. They actually have this climate change risk dashboard that highlights some pretty alarming findings.
All right, I'm ready to lay it on me. What does this climate change risk dashboard reveal?
Well, for starters, did you know that we've already exceeded 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming on a 12-month average?
I knew things were bad, but I didn't realize we were already past that 1.5 degree mark.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's true.
Oh, wow.
And it gets worse.
Oh, no.
The report shows that emissions and greenhouse gas concentrations are at record highs, which means further warming is already baked in.
Oh, geez.
Even if we, dramatically reduced emissions today.
So it's like we've already set the Evan timer and the planet's going to keep warming for a while even after we turn off the heat. Wow, okay, so we're not just dealing with the impacts that we're seeing today. We're dealing with a future that's already been set in motion.
Precisely, and those impacts are already getting pretty severe. We're seeing these unprecedented heat waves, catastrophic floods, more intense wildfires, prolonged droughts.
Yeah, it seems like every time I turn on the news, there's another climate-related disaster unfolding somewhere in the world.
Yeah, and the report makes it very clear that this is just a taste of what's to come.
Oh, no.
Unless we see a dramatic shift in policy and action, we're very likely to exceed 2 degrees Celsius of warming by 2050.
Wow.
Which puts us at a much higher risk of those tipping points and widespread societal and economic disruption.
Okay, so it's a pretty sobering picture, but the report doesn't just leave us hanging there, right?
No, they don't.
They offer some kind of roadmap for action.
They do. They urge policymakers to take immediate steps to mitigate this risk and ensure a solvent planet for current and future generations.
Okay, so what are some of those recommendations? Like, what concrete actions can be taken to bend that risk trajectory back toward a safer zone?
Okay, so we've painted a pretty stark picture of the risks we face, but it sounds like this report isn't just doom and gloom.
Yeah.
They offer some solutions too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. They actually emphasize that we have the knowledge and tools to change course, but we need to act, and we need to act now. The report lays out a whole bunch of concrete recommendations for action.
Okay.
And it all starts with this fundamental shift in how we assess and manage risk.
Right. Okay, so remind me again, what's their main critique of our current risk assessment methods?
Well, they say we're often too short-sighted and way too optimistic.
Yeah.
We're not accounting for those worst-case scenarios and, the interconnectedness of all these risks.
Right.
So they're advocating for adopting those resilience principles we talked about earlier. All right, so using those principles then, what are some specific actions that they recommend?
Well, one of the key recommendations is to accelerate the energy transition.
Oh.
We need to rapidly scale up renewable energy sources and phase out fossil fuels as quickly as possible.
So basically go green, go renewable.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
The report stresses that we need strong policies to incentivize clean energy and disincentivize continued reliance on fossil fuels.
So it's kind of like a carrot and stick approach. Make clean energy attractive and make dirty energy expensive.
Exactly. Yeah. But they also talk about leveraging those positive tipping points in the economy and society.
Okay, this is where it gets interesting. Tell me more about these positive tipping points.
All right, so think of it this way. Just as there are negative tipping points in the climate system that can speed up warming,
Right.
there are also these positive tipping points that can actually accelerate the transition to a more sustainable future. So, for example, as renewable energy becomes cheaper and more efficient, it reaches a point where it's more attractive to investors and consumers than fossil fuels.
Right.
So it leads to rapid adoption and even further innovation.
So instead of having that runaway train heading for disaster, we get this like snowball effect for good.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like a virtuous cycle.
I like that.
And this can happen in other areas too, like think about plant-based diets.
Okay.
Sustainable fashion, circular economy models.
Right.
Once these trends reach that critical mass, they can spread super quickly, transforming entire industries.
Wow, that's a really cool idea.
Yeah.
Okay, so we need to accelerate that energy transition.
Right.
Leverage those positive tipping points. What else is on the agenda for planetary solvency?
Well, even with rapid decarbonization, the report acknowledges that some level of climate change is already locked in.
Right.
So adaptation is crucial. We need to start preparing for a world where climate impacts are already happening and they're going to continue to get worse.
So it's not just about preventing further warming. It's also about learning to live with a climate that's already changing.
Exactly. And this means we need to integrate climate resilience into all aspects of planning and development.
Okay, so give me some examples.
So think about infrastructure, food systems, disaster preparedness, even national security.
Oh, that last one's interesting. I don't often hear climate change being discussed in the context of national security.
Yeah. It's a crucial connection that often gets overlooked.
Okay.
The report highlights how climate change can exacerbate existing geopolitical tensions, leading to resource conflicts, mass migration, even state failure.
Wow.
It's a reminder that climate change isn't just an environmental issue. It has huge social and political implications.
So it's a threat multiplier in a sense.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so we need to accelerate the energy transition, leverage positive tipping points, and adapt to the changes that are already happening. It's like
It is a lot, but the report is ultimately optimistic. They argue that we have the resources and the ingenuity to meet this challenge. It's just a matter of getting our priorities straight and taking action.
Right, but all this talk about policy changes and global transitions, it can feel kind of overwhelming. Like where does individual action fit into this bigger picture of planetary solvency?
That's a great question, and it really goes back to that core principle of Earth system primacy.
Okay.
If we acknowledge that a healthy planet is essential for a healthy society, then it follows that our individual choices matter.
Right.
Every decision we make, from what we buy to how we travel to how we invest our money, it all has an impact on the overall health of the planet.
So it's not just about waiting for governments and corporations to act. It's recognizing that we all have a role to play.
Exactly. Yeah, think of it like this. If we want a solvent planet, we need a solvent society.
Yeah.
And that means each of us needs to be living in a way that contributes to that solvency.
So it's about aligning our personal values with those bigger goals.
Exactly.
It's like those old Think Globally, Act Locally campaigns, but instead of just focusing on our immediate surroundings, we're thinking about the whole planet.
Yeah, exactly. It's about expanding that scope.
Okay.
And it goes beyond just making personal sacrifices. It's about making choices that are good for us and good for the planet.
Okay, so give me an example.
Sure. Shifting to a more plant-based diet can reduce your environmental footprint, and it can also improve your health.
Right.
Choosing to walk, bike, or take public transport instead of driving.
Yeah.
It cuts down on emissions, but it also gets you exercise and fresh air.
Right. So it's about finding those win-win solutions where sustainability and personal well-being go hand in hand.
Exactly. It's not about deprivation. It's about creating a better, healthier, and more sustainable way of life for ourselves and future generations.
That's a message I think a lot of people can get behind. It's not about giving up everything you enjoy. It's just about making smarter choices.
Yeah.
But individual action can only go so far.
Yeah.
Right? We still need systemic change.
Absolutely. The report is very clear on that point. Individual actions are important, but they need to be complemented by bold policy changes and a shift in the way our entire economic system works.
So what kind of systemic changes are they calling for? Like, what would a truly solvent society look like in practice?
That's a great question, and it really goes beyond the specific recommendations in the report.
Okay.
It requires us to reimagine our relationship with nature.
Okay.
And rethink our definition of progress. shifting from a mindset of extraction and exploitation to a mindset of regeneration and stewardship.
So instead of viewing the planet as this resource to be consumed, we start seeing it as this living system that we're part of.
Exactly. And that shift in perspective has huge implications for everything.
Wow.
From how we design our cities, to how we produce our food, to how we measure economic success.
So achieving true planetary solvency requires a pretty fundamental shift in our values and priorities.
It does. But the report argues that this shift is not only necessary, but it's also achievable.
Okay.
They point to all these encouraging examples of this shift that's already happening around the world.
Oh, really? Like what?
Like the growing movement for sustainable finance, the rise of those circular economy business models, the increasing adoption of renewable energy technologies.
Well,
it's about seeing these challenges not as burdens, but as opportunities for innovation and positive change.
so it's not all doom and gloom. There's actually reason for hope.
Yeah, there's definitely a reason for hope. We have the knowledge, the technology, and the resources to create a future where both people and the planet can thrive.
That's awesome.
The question is, do we have the collective will to act?
Well, I hope so. And I hope this deep dive into planetary solvency has given our listeners a better understanding of the challenges and the opportunities.
I agree. And I think one of the key takeaways from the report is that we're not just passengers on this planet, we're the crew.
I love that analogy.
Yeah, it's time we started acting like it.
So what specific actions can individuals take to step up and become more active members of that crew?
That's a great question. How can we move beyond awareness into action?
All right, so we've established that we're all crew members on this spaceship Earth, responsible for steering it towards a solvent future.
We are.
But with a challenge as big and complex as planetary solvency, it can be hard to know where to even begin. So what are some concrete steps that individuals can take to contribute to this collective effort?
Well, remember that idea of voting with your wallet.
Oh, yeah.
It's about recognizing the power of consumer choices. Every time you spend money, you're basically casting a vote for the kind of world that you want to see.
Right. So you're supporting businesses that prioritize sustainability and sending a message.
Exactly. Yeah. And, it goes beyond just buying eco-friendly products. Think about the bigger picture. Where does your food come from? How is your energy generated? What kind of transportation do you rely on?
Right. Those everyday choices.
Yeah. All those everyday choices have an impact. And by making more sustainable ones, you're contributing to that shift towards a more solvent society.
It's like we're all casting these individual votes, and then collectively those votes can kind of shape the direction of the market and influence, what kind of future we create.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be this all or nothing thing, start small, pick one or two areas where you can make a change and go from there.
Yeah, just one step at a time.
Yeah, exactly. Like maybe you could commit to eating one plant-based meal a week. Right. Or you try biking to work a couple times a week instead of driving.
Yeah, those little things.
Yeah, those small changes can add up. And then as you get more comfortable, you can gradually expand your efforts.
Yeah, so it's about building that momentum, finding those changes that work for your lifestyle.
Yeah.
And then just gradually building on them. But what about those of us who want to kind of go beyond that individual action level? How can we advocate for change at a larger scale, at the systemic level?
Well, one really powerful way to amplify your impact is to get involved in advocacy and activism.
Right.
And, this can take a lot of different forms.
Right.
Like supporting organizations that are working on these issues or contacting your elected officials, urging them to prioritize policies that address climate change, protects nature, and, promotes sustainable development.
Right. So it's about raising our voices and making sure that the people in power are hearing our concerns.
Exactly. And it's not just about writing letters or making phone calls. You can volunteer your time, donate to causes. You believe in organize events in your community to raise awareness.
So it's about really creating a movement.
Yeah, building that critical mass of people.
Getting people involved.
We're demanding action on these issues.
Yeah, but sometimes it feels like these problems are so big and complex that, individual actions are just a drop in the ocean. How do we kind of stay motivated and not get overwhelmed by the scale of the challenge?
That's a really valid concern. I think, it's easy to get discouraged when you're facing a global crisis like this.
Yep.
But I think it's important to remember that every action, no matter how small, it does contribute to the solution. So don't underestimate the power of your individual choices and your voice.
Right. So even if it's just one small thing.
Yeah, exactly.
It all adds up.
It all adds up. And you're not alone in this. There are millions of people around the world who are working towards this same goal.
That's a good point.
Connecting with others who share your concerns can really create that sense of community and shared purpose, which can be incredibly empowering and motivating.
So it's about finding your tribe, basically connecting with the people who are also, fighting the good fight and drawing strength and inspiration from each other.
Exactly. And don't forget to celebrate those wins along the way.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
Every step towards a more sustainable future is a victory worth recognizing.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to end on. It's easy to get caught up in all the doom and gloom, but it's also important to acknowledge the progress that's being made and celebrate those who are leading the charge.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder that change is possible.
Absolutely.
And we all have a role to play.
I agree. This report is really a powerful call to action, urging us to shift from a mindset of scarcity to a mindset of abundance. Recognizing that we have the potential to not only solve these challenges, but to create a world that's not only sustainable, but thriving.
That's a really great way to put it. And it reminds me of something you said earlier about focusing on the potential rather than the limits.
Oh, yeah.
Can you kind of elaborate on that a bit more?
Sure. So the report talks about planetary boundaries as these kind of hard limits that we need to stay within. But what if, instead of just trying to avoid exceeding those limits, we actually focus on that potential for regeneration and restoration?
Okay.
What if we saw the Earth not as this finite resource to be exploited, but as a living system with this incredible capacity for renewal?
Right. So instead of just being defensive, it's about being more proactive and regenerative.
Exactly.
Instead of just preventing the worst, we start creating the best.
Yeah, imagine a world where we're not just mitigating climate change, but actually restoring ecosystems, replenishing natural resources, and creating a planet that's more biodiverse and resilient.
So it's like going beyond sustainability. It's about actually regenerating.
Yeah, it's about thriving.
Yeah, I like that.
And that's the kind of future that planetary solvency can unlock if we dare to dream big and act boldly.
It's a huge shift in perspective, but it opens up a whole new realm of possibilities. Instead of just trying to survive, we start thriving, in harmony with the planet that sustains us.
That's the ultimate goal, I think.
Yeah, it is.
And it's one worth striving for.
Well said. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into planetary solvency. It's a complex and challenging topic.
It is.
But also one that's filled with hope and possibility. So remember, we're all crew members on this spaceship, and it's up to us to chart a course towards a solvent and thriving future. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep taking action until next time, deep divers. Thanks for listening today. 4 recurring narratives underlie every episode: boundary dissolution, adaptive complexity, embodied knowledge, and quantum-like uncertainty. These aren't just philosophical musings, but frameworks for understanding our modern world. We hope you continue exploring our other podcasts, responding to the content, and checking out our related articles at helioxpodcast.substack.com.